the first race on Saturday, right off the bat, it's going to be a toss race, and you're going to see why because I couldn't really figure out who would be able to have the lead at the second call. And the first call, though, for sure looked to be dominated by the 10. 22 seconds flat in the maiden win, 2 races back at Indiana Grand. Now, that was going 5.5 furlongs, and I think that's something you need to take into consideration here since we are going, just shorter than a mile, the about 7 furlong distance here at Keeneland. But more importantly, what I want you to look at, though, is the E1 and E2 pace in that win 91 and 87. When we go through here, the other early runners, you're going to see that the 87 pace figure is not going to be in the lead at the second call. Immediately, I knew I wanted to toss the 3, considering the E1 and E2 pace of 77 at both calls. Last time out in the maiden win for 30,000, coming back against 30,000, I felt was going to be a severe underlay at 7-2. Public was on that. Ended up going off at 6-1. So I think that was pretty easy to see in a bad morning line. The 4 is the first horse that we run into where we see the E1 and E2 pace is going to be dominant over the 10. 90 and a 98. So at the second call, our 10 can only run an 87. This 4 is already showing the ability to get there in a 98 at the second call before fading. So we know that the 4 is going to have pressure on the 10 early. And then the 5, we're seeing the same sort of situation. Maiden claiming win for 16,000 last time. Claimed jumping up to 30,000 in here today. Already a red flag. E1 and E2, 89. And then a 92. That's going to have some pressure on the 10 as well at the second call. Not as quick as the 4, but that's another horse that should be able to pass the 10 by the second call. So I think the first thing I need to realize is that having the 10 as the A horse was the wrong call in here. And in my head, I'm thinking he's sprinting. He's still sprinting. Maybe the early speed of the other runners is a little dulled from those routes. But when you look at the E1 and E2 pace figure, that's not true. They're quicker than the 10. So hand up, the 10 was a bad call as an A horse. Then when we get through here, looking at the pressers and off the pace runners, the 1 wins this race at 7-2. And I had him as a B horse. Reason why is when you look at the maiden claiming win for 50,000, that was against a 45 second call at Turfway. Since then has been an allowance 50,000, dropped last time against $75,000 claimers, and now is making a substantial drop in the $30,000 claimers. This is going to be a much easier spot for him, and it ended up being, considering he won the race. 2 was eliminated just purely off of form, comes in showing nothing. You have to go all the way down here to August 28th of last year. That was against a 46 and 2/5 seconds second call time. Good positional moves, but needs a much slower pace than what he's even going to see here today for the first time, facing $30,000 claimers. Then the 7 is kind of in the same boat. Coming in from Belterra off a maiden win, 2 back, 46 and 1/5 seconds to the second call. More importantly, was in second and then took the lead at the second call. Not going to happen in here today, considering there's 4 other early runners in this race. So positionally, he's going to be out of where he wants to be to win the race. He was a toss as well. The 8, poor form, ran an okay race, 2 back. I would want to make a claim for him when you see the maiden win from February 11th at Tampa. 44 and 4/5 to the second call. Made a huge move in there positionally from pretty much the back of the pack to win it by 5 lengths. But his form since then has shown absolutely nothing. And I think even $30,000 claimers is too much for him to even handle in here. You can see 2 races after the maiden win against $30,000 claimers, I had nothing to show for it. And since the claim hasn't done anything either, so I tossed him because of the form. And then lastly, the 9, when we look at his maiden claiming win for 12-5, 46 and 2/5 to the second call, was up on the pace as well before drawing off. Probably a little bit more of an early horse, even though he hasn't shown it recently that he wants to get to the front. But it's just because he's too slow. The pace has been way too fast for him to get to the front. So it's another horse that's tossed. Regardless, I passed this race. I wanted nothing to do with it. Funny enough, our C horse, the 5, went off as the 9-5 favorite And I think he was a pretty quick toss. He was an outside looking in horse. The cutback could have helped him, but I think he had to be too far up on the pace to where eating 9 to 5 would have been a terrible bet, in my opinion. But one wins, like we said, but a race that for sure I wanted nothing to do with, considering it was kind of hard to get a judge on who was going to control this pace early. 6 first-time starters in the second race, and when you go through here, you can see no one of the runners that have ran before have ever gotten to the front at the first call. And to me, that's a big negative because, you're assuming one of these first-time starters is going to take the lead, and went off at even money. Ended up losing in here, but, I had him as an A as well. I think the most telling stat that I rolled with, and a lot of other people did too, debuting at maiden claiming, Ward is hitting at 38% with a positive ROI too. So I think, in theory, the 9-2, yeah, awesome bet. I would agree with that. Even odds, no chance. The 7 actually wins this race at 3-1, pretty much right on that morning line. Either way, this is a race I want nothing to do with. You don't know who's going to get to the front. The way I handicap, pretty much takes me out of my element in my game. So ended up passing this race because of the first time starters and no true early front speed. In this third race, I had the 5 and 6 as A horses, and the reason why was because I was just hoping to be able to get odds to bet both of them to win, because immediately I was able to toss the 1 off of form and the 7 off of form. Not a secret with the 1, but the 7 actually went off at 4-1, so it took a little bit of money in the betting. So we have the 2, 3, and 6 that are early runners, and I sided with the 6 being the best early speed. And the reason why isn't because of the times, because these times aren't very fast, and he was up on the pace before drawing off the win by 13 lengths. But the 2 and the 3, they haven't been able to win going a route. Starting with the 2, we see maiden winner last time out going a 1-turn mile at Churchill Downs. Obviously very fast fractions in here, and just stayed ahead by open lengths the whole way through. And then the 3 was sort of an odd one, because when you look at his 2 best performances, 2 and 3 races back, they both were on sealed tracks. The other interesting thing is when you look at their E1 and E2 numbers and their wins, the 2 ran a 91 and an 89. The 3 in the maiden won an 88 and 89. So at the second call, they should be right on top of each other. We can see that the 2 needs to be ahead by open lengths to win. That's obvious, especially considering the other times that he's been pressured. You see all the way down here on his debut race when he was pressured, he fades. And then 3 races back when he's pressured between the first and second call, he also fades. So he has to be ahead by open lengths. So he was a toss at 37-1. Then the 3, who I don't think is going to be able to sustain this early speed all the way through. And I think that's obvious considering the last 2 races where we see faster fractions, he hasn't been able to do much and can't even get to the front either. I just think he was a pretty simple toss, and especially at 5-2. He's going around 2 turns for the first time, as well as the 2, who's the other early speed. This 6 should have no problem letting them go out, do whatever they want, and benefit from those fractions. Now, with that being said, probably 9 out of 10 times, I would argue that the 6 needs to be, right on the pace to win this race. How slow these fractions are and how far off he drew away to win this race is what made me believe he's more of a presser. I have him as an early horse because it's how he won his only race so far, but I think pressing is really what he wants to do in here. And, so did the public. Stayed at the morning line and ended up being 4-5. And then I had the 5 in here as an A horse as well, going around 2 turns for the first time. What I liked, and some would say might be a negative, didn't make up any ground until the stretch call to get up to win that race. And then lastly, the 4, coming in off a maiden win, terribly slow fractions at Indiana last time, and closed in to win this race. Is he better than the 6 from coming off the pace? Not at all. I think the speed figures even support that. 83 compared to the 74 that he earned in his last start. This 6 is much better than the 4 in here. So we have 2 horses in here that have no form. We have the 2 and 3, 2 other horses that we know are pretty much going to eliminate themselves on the front end. I wanted to just bet the 5 and 6 in this race to win. The 6 was 4-5. The 5 went off at 9-1 and actually won this race. I think that just shows the power of eliminate these runners and get it down to who you think the true contenders are, because we're able to take advantage and make our own entry in here between the 5 and the 6. I get the 5 wins at 9-1. If you told me to choose one horse, I would say the 6. I think the 6 is the best horse in the race, but we're able to get those odds in our favor, eliminate short price runners as well, and benefit the most by getting our own entry in here between the 5 and 6, and the 5 gets it home for us. The fourth race was more of a test of discipline, I think, from a betting perspective. The 7 was the horse that I felt was going to take the lead, but I didn't think was good enough to win the race gate to wire. What I ended up doing was taking his first race in here, 46 3/5 seconds to the second call in that win. That was going to be our mark in here. I felt with him being the only speed in here, we're probably looking more at that 23 seconds first call. I want to use the quicker of the 2 second call times he's set and wins to evaluate the rest of the runners in here. So pretty quickly we can eliminate the 1 and the 2 off of just form alone. They come in not showing, a step of running, so I wanted nothing to do with them win betting wise. The 4, the race 2 back, is the one that got me intrigued. 45 3/5 seconds to the second call. I get it's a 5 furlong race, and it looks to be that he wants to stay on the turf. But, between the 3 turf races that he's been entered in, the only one that was taken off the turf, he actually showed anything, and he won that race by just over a length. Made a good beaten lengths move first to second call. If we go all the way down to his maiden win, 46 3/5 seconds to the second call. The first call time of 22 2/5 seconds is kind of what I'm expecting for us to see in here today. He actually takes that race gate to wire and was challenged at the first call. So I felt he should be more forward than what we've seen lately, and making him a C I felt was pretty important in this spot. Actually went off at half the morning line at 5-1. The 5 is someone that I just really didn't like, and you can see his last 2 races, he's had okay performances. 2 back going the mile, he made a good move into the beaten lanes before fading, and the cut back to the sprint I think was smart. That was against pretty slow fractions, and they're 46 seconds to the second call, only good enough to finish 5th. Yeah, I just think he's probably a step behind these horses still today. The 6 is the horse I had in here as a B, and the race last time out is no secret. 45 4/5 seconds to the second call, actually loses a position first to second call, then draws off the win by open lanes. 12-1, no chance we were getting that. Actually, another runner that gets slashed in half ends up going off at 6-1 in here. Then when we come down to the 9, a very logical horse, against this field. Even more impressive is his race last time out. 44 3/5 to the second call, makes a move in there, beaten lanes and positionally, ends up losing the race by a neck. Huge jump in the speed figures, and looked to be the horse to beat coming into this race. Ended up going off at even money though. And then lastly, the 10, same sort of thing that we saw with the 5 horse. He's been running good races, but late at the wire, he's just really nowhere to be found. He's so far off these paces. So I think early, if we looked just at first and second call, I would say he's running great races. It's later in the race where he's just fading down the lane and can't keep up with those early fractions that are being set. So I wanted nothing to do with him. What I ended up doing was passing this race because the 9 got absolutely hammered in the betting, who I wanted on top. And then we see the 6 get cut in half of his price off the morning line. And then the 4, same thing as well. 10-1 the morning line, goes off at 5-1, actually ends up winning this race at 5-1. So, a horse that I thought was on the outside looking in ends up winning this race, but it was one that, I felt the favorite in the 9 was very legit. And then the other 2 runners that I, possibly could have bet on, they were just taking too much money for me. So I ended up passing the race for that reason. But, I think it was a tough race to handicap, but if you're able to get past this 9 and say that performance last time out took too much out of him, maybe, a classic bounce horse, then I think you easily would have gotten the winner between the 6 or the 4. The main race we faced in the 5th was one that I normally wouldn't bet, but with so many horses that I just felt weren't very good, I think we were able to narrow this race down, at least from an A horse perspective. The B and C runners were really on the outside looking in when we evaluate the pace line, especially of the 3. But this 7 was going to be our early runner. He's the only early speed in here. The only issue is at 116 and 1/5 isn't going to be that slow of a second call time today. So what I ended up doing was going through here and seeing who can run to the 111 and 3/5 seconds second call that the 3 faced last time out. Now I know that was at Colonial, and usually we see, second call times that have been questionable, I think is the way to put it when we've gone through this meet. But what I liked especially was seeing the +9 at the second call. So we know this horse has faced the fastest pace line anyone else coming into this race did in their last performance. Now I had the 2 in here, and it's because of the positional move that she made from the first call to the finish. 6 lengths off of it was a dead closer and tried to close into not, super fast fractions. Today, is she going to get that fast of fractions? Well, probably not, considering we only have one early runner. So it may have been a bad call on my end. I just know that this horse can pass other horses, needs a little bit of pace in front of her, and only at 2 starts, there's not a whole lot to hold against her in either of those races. Keep that in mind when we go through here, because some of these other runners are very quick to toss. The 4 was a horse I had as a C, and I probably should have just eliminated as a whole off the chart. 0 for 10 lifetime, ended up going off at 4-1. This horse has had all sort of pace lines that, she should be able to win against, especially last race, how slow those fractions were. So I wanted to not bet her to win, but I felt if you're playing, pick 4, pick 5s, I felt that at 8-1 at least, I felt she's a little bit of value. At 4-1, she's definitely not. The 5 is another horse, 0 for 11 lifetime. I did eliminate her. She's tried everything. She's tried turf. She's had off the turf races. She's been on the all-weather surface at Turfway. She needs to get off the turf again. I don't know. All I know is that I want nothing to do with her, even though she does come in with 2 okay races. But again, against, call times that she should be able to win against, and she's just not. So another toss in here. The 6, 0 for 21 lifetime. I don't care what she's done in her last races, but all I know is 0 for 21. I want nothing to do with her. And you can even see last time out, 112 and 2/5, nowhere to be found come the end. Going down to the 8, I actually had as a B horse, and it's because of the race 2 back. Pretty slow fractions, 115 and 2/5 seconds. I like the positional move that she was able to make in there. If this pace is slow in here again today, we know that she can at least run against slow fractions. She was one that I don't think could beat the 2 or 3, but if there's slow fractions, and again, we have a full field on the turf here, anything's possible, I guess you could say. She was 10-1 on the morning line, cut it in half, goes down to 5-1. Not a whole lot of, meat to really bet on in there, but I think one that you definitely could have gotten to as a legit contender, and I think even more confirmation because she finished second in this race. The 9, though, is the horse that maybe want to dive into here. So first thing is that she ended up being 7-2. Look at her last 3 races. She's finishing second, just not passing the other horse late to win. Then when you look betting wise, she's eating a lot of money, and she's 0 for 7. On top of that, we're seeing these second call times, 113 and 1/5, 113 and 2/5, 116 and 2/5, -18, -13, -15, and she's not able to win. What pace does she need to win? It's just a horse that looks to be a lifetime loser, and at 7-2 was a big time toss and fade in this race. And then lastly, the 10, just nowhere to be found late in any of her last 3 races. And again, you can see the second call times super, super slow. And that 111 and 3/5 that the 2 can run is going to dominate in this race. So what I ended up doing was just making an easy 2-horse bet in here. The 2 was 7-2, and then the 3 who wins the race was 3-1. I think this was easy as a race gets. The 8, again, like I said, comes in second. But with wanting to toss the 9, I felt we were getting some pretty good value in here on the 2 and 3, even at those odds. This 6 race would have nearly qualified as a max bet for me, but with the scratch of the 12, who I thought was going to take a lot of money at that 5-2 morning line, it made the 2 just a clear early runner in here. And when you look, 112 and 3/5 to the second call was up on the pace at the first and second call before losing by a length in there. There's really no one in this race that's going to be able to compete with that 112 and 3/5 seconds. And it was pretty apparent, especially considering he ends up going off at 1-2. The 1 horse, very quick toss, showed no form even in that slow race, want nothing to do with him. The 3, another horse coming out of a terribly slow race, finishes third, gets a plus in there for the form. That's a race, though, that says, yes, he needs to stretch out, but even at those slow fractions, probably should have performed better in my eyes. He was a toss. The 4 was the only other horse in here I thought really even had a shot. I had him as a B, probably could have eliminated him as a whole. But what I liked was that he came from 9 lengths off of it in 8th out of 9 runners, comes all the way up, takes the lead and stretch before getting caught late. I get that was against a 113 and 2/5, but again, I'm looking for horses that can pass because I know who my early runner is, and I know that mark, even if it's a second slower, he had no problem closing just over 5 lengths to take the lead in the stretch. So he's going to be positionally where he wants to be. It'll just be a matter of if he's good enough to win the race. He came down a little bit from his morning line at 6-1. The 5's a horse you see 113 and 2/5 last time out. The 4 actually beat him in that race, so I want nothing to do with him, considering I know that the 4 is better, even against that slower fractions, than what we're going to see in here today. The 6 was a horse that could threaten for the lead early, but what's he want to do? Because you can see that the first time he ever took the lead was on the turf at Churchill, and he fades in here terribly bad. The race before that at Ellis Park, going a mile, speed was favored. He was up on it the first and second call, and then fades again terribly. He got to the second call in 111 and 4/5 seconds. So we already know that he's 2/5 slower than what the 2 can run in here. So he was going to be a toss for that reason. The 8 comes in with not a whole lot of form. The race last time out would make you think maybe so, but when you look, 114 and 1/5 seconds to the second call, going to be way too fast in here for him. The 10, absolutely no form. And then the 11, another horse coming in out of a sprint, stretching out, but again, against slow fractions, he, just kind of staggers up in here in the 4th, and that's what a horse that's closing is going to do. And against slow fractions, the stretch out, I don't know if it's going to benefit him that much, considering this 2 is such a dominant early runner. And that's what happens. This 2 wins this race gate to wire. I wish that the 12 would have stayed in, because I think even if the 12 does stay in, he dominates this horse early as well. And if anything, may have actually could have set it up for the 4, who came in second in this race at 6-1. First things first with this 7th race, 1.5 miles on the turf. I don't listen. This distance isn't ran all that much. I'm not very good at handicapping him. The 12 was who I wanted as an early runner, but he ended up scratching. I just completely passed this race as a whole. I took a stab at what I thought were the most logical contenders in here between the 4 and the 6. The 1 ends up winning the race, and he was 6-5 in the morning line. 2-1 is what he ended up winning at. The issue that I had with him, I took sort of the West Coast horse shipping into here, so I faded him for that reason. And I think a lot of other people were too, clearly, since he was 6-5 in the morning line. He barely wins the race, but I think a horse that, if you liked anyone else in here, I think he's someone you just toss, because the only good races he's had has been on the West Coast on the turf. A much different ball game over here in Kentucky. I think what the difference, though, for me looking at that angle of betting turf races, is that it's 1.5 miles. So, he still has to have the stamina and distance to go that far. But 2-1, if you liked him, I think you got an absolute steal in here. The 8th race ended up being a pretty tricky one, considering we had 6 early horses in here that needed to get to the front to win, and only left the 5, 9, 10, and 11 to come off the pace. Now, to start with, I felt that this 2 was going to be potentially a dominant early horse, and that's why I included her in there with the other 2 A horses that would come from off the pace. The line 2 back, 21 3/5 the first call, 44 seconds flat to the second call. In the loss, I felt was telling because last time out for her, she was able to get gate to wire against, slower fractions, but she was able to control the front the whole way throughout there. So I think there's a few things at play here. Does she need to get to the front to win? I say yes. What I like more importantly, though, is her first race in her career. Look at where she sat positionally in that race. Third off by a length and a half at the first call. Held position to third at the second call before taking over in stretch before being caught late. She then, after that, set that fast pace line 21 3/5, 44 seconds flat to the second call, and faded in there late, and that was going 7 furlongs. Then cut back in distance in her most recent start and takes it gate to wire and draws off to win by 7.5 lengths. Again, I truly felt that she could be a potential dominant early runner with the rest of these other earlies in here. So what I want to do is look at the 98 and 101 E1 and E2 pace rating and see how the other early horses stack up with that, because that determined how I actually bet this race in the end. So our next early horse is the 3. You can see 96 and 96 E1 E2 ran right up where our first call is projecting in here today, but the second call kind of tapers off and she wins that race essentially gate to wire, second by a head at the first call. I think a little bit slower though than what our 2 could run. The 4 was a toss essentially off of form alone. She's been nowhere to be found of recent, and won't be in here either. It's much too slow. Moving over to the 6, we can see 2 races back when she won gate to wire, 93 and 95 E1 and E2, and that's represented when you see the raw times of 22 and 3/5 seconds at the first call. She's going to be way too slow in here to win today, so she was going to be a toss. And then the 7, sort of the same thing, 94 and a 90 E1 E2, very slow fractions first and second call. And I think that's supported also with the -9 we see there at the second call. This horse needs to be out by open lengths to win the race, and that's not going to happen in here today, especially considering that we see other early runners in here have been able to face early pressure and draw off to win the race. So again, the 7, in form, but this is way out of her capability as an early runner. And then lastly, the 8, the race that causes concern is 3 back, 100 and 106 E1 and E2 pace rating, and you can see, even though it's Churchill, it's still 21 and 1/5 seconds to the first call, 44 and 1/5 to the second call. We know the 2 can get there in 44 seconds flat in first, and this horse was there by open lengths at the second call. Again, I included the 2 in here as an A, but when we go through here and look at the E1 and E2 pace ratings, we can see that there's going to be more than enough early pressure on her, and I think that was probably a pretty poor decision on my end, even though I did think that she had the potential to be a dominant early. When you look through here again, there's just no way that's going to happen with the presence of these other early runners in here. With this many early runners, I wanted to cover the pressers that I thought had the best shot, and the 5 I should have eliminated as a B horse comes in with absolutely no form. But what I liked is that in the races prior to that, she was able to pass runners. You can see 3 races back, sat 5th up to 4th at the second call before losing by just under a length in that mile race. What made me want to reach for, though, was the maiden score in here back at Oaklawn Park. 21 4/5 to the first call, 45 seconds flat to the second call, and you can see her E1 and E2 pace ratings of a 99 and 106. That 106 could be deadly in here against this group because she's going to get pace up front for her to run into. I think more importantly, though, is where is she at positionally, and I was kind of blinded by it. She sat 3rd, first and second call before taking over and winning by 3.5 lengths. We already know there's 6 other horses in here that's faster than her at the first call. She's not going to be faster than 3 of them in this race today. So I think the bad form and positionally where she's going to be, having her as a B horse was another bad call in this race. And you can see I'm just falling apart handicapping wise when we look back at this. Then when we go down to the outside runners, the 9 was someone I for sure wanted to target, and it's because of her last race. 21 and 2/5 seconds, even though we're on the turf, 45 and 2/5 to the second call. What I liked was the positional move. Came from 8th and closed up to take over in the stretch before being caught late. I felt she's going to get enough pace in here again today. If she can be willing to sit in the back again and make that run like she did on the turf, this race should be right up her alley. And I think the betting was sort of thinking the same thing. She ended up being 4-1 in here as an A horse for us. Again, though, when we look at her positionally on the dirt, she wants to be up front. In these 3 best races she ran on the dirt, she was in second off by a length. That's not going to happen in here today. And I think that was a pretty bad call, again, when we go back and look through it. Because positionally, she's not going to be where she wants to be to run these good races that she's shown before on the dirt. I was just blinded by this last race on the turf where she was able to close. I felt it showed a new dimension in her game, and it was just going to be a matter of if she could translate that over to the dirt. Now, the 10 is a horse that I did toss because of form as a presser. She's been absolutely blown out in her last 3 races, and I just felt at 5-2 in the favorite, I felt she was a very, very vulnerable horse in this spot. Even when we go down to her win in the maiden score, you can see 22 and 3/5 seconds to the first call, 46 seconds flat to the second call, a -4 and a -7. And more importantly, when we look at the E2, an 89. We know that 5 can run over 100 figure in there. And then the positional calls, you can see she was in third, first, and second call before going off to win. I just felt there was way too many negatives on her coming into this race, and I wanted to fade her for that reason. And then lastly, the 11 is someone that I felt would get potentially positionally where she wanted to be. You look at her maiden win from last year, 22 and 1/5 seconds to the first call, 46 and 3/5 to the second call. Not the fastest of times, but she was able to sit mid-pack in there 4th at the first and second call, and then draws off to win the race. I kind of felt she was going to get the same positional setup in here, and so did most of the public. 8-1 the morning line gets bet down to 3-1. What I ended up doing was just betting the 9 and the 11 to win in this race, even though the 2 that I had also as an A horse was going off at 6-1. I just felt there was so much early pressure in this race. Even at 6-1, I kind of felt that wasn't even enough of a price, since she wasn't able to win setting that fast pace line on July 1st at Ellis Park. It didn't matter though, because the 10 ends up winning the race at 5-2. Look, that's a horse I'm going to look to fade 100 times out of 100. There's so many negatives on her, even with the drop back down out of these graded stakes races. So, tough beat. I think I was just way off on this race from the get-go and kind of just scrambling and searching, especially considering we've seen so many logical favorites win on this card. I was hoping to be able to cash in on the favorite that had way too many negatives for me to like handicapping-wise. I ended up passing this 9th race just on the fact that we didn't have pace lines for everybody in here. The 7 and 9 were going to be the early runners, but the 9 actually scratched, so it left us with the 7, and the only real context clues we had in here was looking at the notes in the prior races. Raced in second, led narrowly over 1 furlong out, and then you can see 2 races back, led after 1 furlong. With no other presence of early runners in here, I mean, she should be able to have the front to her own in this race. When we go through, though, and look at the other runners that do have lines, you can see the 1's been struggling lately, and also has the 10 not able to get there against even grade 3 and just stakes company. And the 12, same sort of situation, been racing against graded stakes company, but not showing a whole lot lately. Been running good races, but not enough to win, especially against some very slow paces in here, like 2 back. I felt that the public was right on this race between the 2 and the 4. And look, the race last time out for the 2, 1:13 and 2/5 seconds to the second call. The track was soft. She's able to close from 7th up here, run 103 speed figure. That was kind of the mark I was looking for everybody else in here. She ends up being 5-2 when things close. The 4 actually ends up winning the race at 6-5. I don't think a lot of people were eliminating this horse. Very logical runner in here. She's been winning everything overseas coming into here. And then you see her last race going a mile, had no problem with that. Look, I mean, not much insight I can add into here with not having the actual positional calls of every horse in fractional time. So, race that I passed, and another favorite that was legitimate that we were able to dodge. Then to wrap up things on this Saturday card was another, very logical favorite in this race. With the scratches of the 3 and the 8, we had no true early presence. So what I ended up doing was looking at the 1's time in here, and you can see the second call time of 1:12 and 2/5 seconds is going to be very dominant against this field. Even money on the morning line, no shot, goes off as a 2-5 favorite and wins. But when you look through here, there's no one else that can even touch this second call time that the 1's going to be able to beat. The 2 comes in with not a whole lot of form. You can see races that are going quicker than 1:12 and 2/5, nowhere to be found in there. Eliminate her. And then when we get past these scratches, the 6, 2 races back, 1:12, only good enough to be in third. She's not quick enough to race against 3/5 slower. The 7, you can see her last 2 races, 1:12 and then a 1:14. The 1:14, she was only good enough to be in their third, off by just under 2 lengths. He's going to be a toss for that reason too. The 9, no form, slow second call times on the turf and the dirt, nowhere to be found late. The 10, same sort of thing. 2 races back, 1:14 to the second call, only good enough to be in their second. Going to be much too quick for him. And then the 12 has shown some good races of recent, but those are sprinting against pretty slow first and second call times. You go all the way down here to October 27th at Keeneland, 1:12 and 3/5 the second call. He's someone that you might want to consider in here, but it's still going to be super far off from what the 1 is going to be able to run against this race. If anything, the 12 actually might be the early marker for the 1 to run into. But, hard to get around a 2-5 shot that's this dominant. Had to pass the race, and it was just kind of a slow, chalky day this Saturday.